All right. Well, hey, Charlene, why don't you tell people about your documentary short Graduation Day? What's it about? What will people take away from this?
Yeah, so graduation day follows grandmother Connie and her grandson Sage Stone Sand as they are graduating together in their community of James Smith Cree Nation. And it's really beautiful because it's the first year that James Smith Cree Nation has an adult education program so that adults can get their graduation.
Nice. And what kind of feeling or do you want to instill in people?
Yeah, so for me personally, I felt like this story was so beautiful because it's like reflecting this relationship between Sage and Connie, between like a grandmother and a grandchild. And I just feel like that relationship is so important. And in our indigenous cultures, there's so much intergenerational knowledge that gets passed on between those generations. And it's a very sacred time in your life when you're coming towards the end and when you're coming up in the beginning. And so they reflect each other. And so it's like a really beautiful relationship that they get to share. And it felt very familiar to me because I have a very close relationship with my grandmother. She was really influential for me growing up. And I think that's like reflective of a lot of people. Even thinking about how we're dealing with issues of intergenerational trauma, there's a lot of healing that happens between those generations that with time we get to like deal with our wounds and get to share that with each other and get more comfortable with having those moments of bonding. And so I just felt like Sage and Connie, their relationship just really showcased the healing that our nations are doing through this relationship work, through intergenerational connection, and how important that is.
Great. That's a lot of context. I appreciate that. Where will this short documentary be available for people to see?
Yeah, so it's going to be premiering at Imaginative this year. It's going to be playing on June 8th there. And then it's also going to be available on CBC Gem. So if people have CBC Gem, they can watch it there anytime.
Amazing. So, how this is a documentary. How do you create a somewhat, let's say, somewhat natural environment for people to be themselves as a documentary filmmaker?
I feel like making films, especially with documentary, it's like relationship building and it's just creating safe spaces for people to be authentic, and to be vulnerable because it's very vulnerable being on camera. And when you're sharing something personal, it can feel kind of scary. And so it's really important that people feel safe and feel heard and listened to. And so the relationship kind of starts even before we get there, before we get to the location. Like we have conversations like over the phone or through email, or maybe we'll have a Zoom. So Tasha was really close with Tammy. And so we were already having conversations before we got there. And when we got there it's like really important that we spend time getting to know each other, gift giving. We also got invited to the family's graduation party. And so there's a lot of interpersonal relationships that are really important to the narrative because without those, people feel like kind of scared or like uncertain. And so like we're just joking around a lot and trying to have a good time. And this film is really about celebration. And so we're not really asking people to bare their soul too much, but more so just share their excitement and their love. And so it's really affectionate, it's really intimate, and it's really celebratory.
Yeah, definitely. So, how long was the production, and who were some of the key people who helped you out along the way?
Yeah, so the production was just a weekend. We had 3 shooting days. One day was just for B-roll, and then 2 days with our cast, or our cast with the family. Me and Tasha co-directed, and that was like such an amazing experience. Tasha is someone who I've always looked up to. I really respect her. I'm super inspired by her, and she's done so much amazing work. And so I jumped at the opportunity of working with her again. And we also had we were really lucky to be working with Oliver King, who is a community member of James Smith Cree Nation and is also a filmmaker. And so Ollie really helped us with like wrangling all of the kids. So we had to get release forms for every single kid in the school, which was a lot of work. And so Ollie was just running around trying to get all of these releases done and literally got every single kid. So that was like a huge feat. And so, like everybody in the community was also very gracious and welcoming and warm with us and let us, take over lots of spaces in the school so that we could do our interviews there. And yeah, it was just like a really great crew and great environment to be working in.
Nice. Do you have a favorite documentary short?
Well, one of the films that actually inspired the way that we wanted to make this film and the tone that we were going for was A Long Line of Ladies, which to me is just such a beautiful film that talks about how Indigenous communities are coming together and celebrating each other and healing and we just wanted to like showcase like how the community comes together to honor their community members like Sage and Connie.
Nice. Do you have a favorite line or moment in Graduation Day?
It's so hard because Sage and Connie were so like they're such amazing people and they're so kind and they're really funny. And their relationship is, they tease each other a lot, which was really awesome to witness. It's very common, I feel like in Indigenous families, a way of like showing love is by teasing each other. And so, one thing that, I found interesting was how Sage was kind of like complaining about how his grandmother Connie has a hard time hearing. And so sometimes he'll have to like speak loudly in order for her to like hear him. And sometimes people get offended at him yelling at his grandmother in public. And I related to that because my grandmother's also very hard of hearing. And so I'm always having to yell at her. But I'm not yelling at her because I'm mad. I'm just yelling at her because that's how we have to communicate, And so it was just really lovely watching them, joke around about doing homework together and teasing each other about, graduating and who's gonna, get the better grade. And, it was really, really lovely to watch them be together and share that time.
That is fun. That's nice stuff. Are there upcoming Indigenous filmmakers that we don't know about yet that excite you?
Um, I mean, like Oliver King, who worked with us, was really great. There's so many Indigenous filmmakers in the world right now. And I feel like in Winnipeg, I'm a part of the Winnipeg Indigenous Filmmakers Collective. And it's a collective that's been going on for like 10 years now. And there's so many amazing Indigenous filmmakers a part of that group.
Mhm.
One of them being Rachel Bolio, Farah Murdoch, John Seymour, so many people. I feel bad naming names because I could never name enough because there's so much growing talent. I couldn't like single certain people out, but I feel like, Winnipeg, I'm really lucky to be here because there's like a huge growth of Indigenous filmmakers coming out of this place.
Is that just to talk about that generally, what that means to you to see so many Indigenous filmmakers starting to come up and really, kick ass and take names?
It's amazing. It's amazing. For me, growing up, like one of my favorite movies was about like residential school. And that was, really, kind of interesting to look at because it is like, there's a lot of trauma in there. But for me, I didn't have a lot of visual representation of myself growing up on screen. And so that was like one place that I could see myself visually represented. And so now we're like witnessing this beautiful renaissance, I feel, of like this resurgence of Indigenous storytelling and ways of doing things also. It's not just our narratives, but it's also our processes. And so I'm just super excited to like see like, authentic representation coming from Indigenous peoples, sharing our narratives because, I feel like how we got to where we are is through our narratives, being taken from us and, not being shared authentically. And so I really think that we're like on the precipice of like, a beautiful revolution of cinema and also storytelling and even maybe politics. I think like there's a lot of great things happening.
Well, it's great to have a sense of optimism about things. That's a good way to wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
So, what would you say the best thing about making a documentary short as a filmmaker is?
Well, honestly, I think it's really hard to make documentaries. I find that I feel a huge sense of responsibility to the narrative and to the people that I'm working with, and that I'm representing their story in a way that feels good to them and that is, accurate according to their reality. And so it can be really hard to manage people's expectations and also make sure that you're, coming forward in a good way with the story. And so I feel honored every time I have the opportunity to work with someone or to tell a story because I know that that story is super valuable. And when we tell that story in a good way and, we're working together, I do feel like that is, an act of healing, that is revolutionary, that is, very creative. It's a way of like exploring new ways of being. And for me, I'm an observer, and I feel like making documentaries is like kind of just ex sharing what I'm seeing with other people. And then I'm collaborating with the storytellers, which is the participants, in how we're going to do that. And for me, it feels very collaborative and it feels like magic. And I
Ooh,
just really enjoy helping people share their stories and having those, come out to the world.
do you wish to generate empathy and compassion as a filmmaker through your lived experience and sharing others' lived experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think, for me, filmmaking is an incredible tool. How I got into filmmaking is like kind of like a weird way is I went to university and I'm, historically was a creative person, but in university, like there wasn't a lot of creative classes. And so I tried film. And that showed me that like, oh, I could like work in film and like I could be a filmmaker and this is like an actual like possibility for me. And as I was going to university, I was also learning about, colonization. I was learning about the history of Canada and how Indigenous peoples have been represented in that story of colonization. And I realized that so much of my life, I had felt like a shame of being Indigenous. And I realized that was manufactured by these narratives of colonization, and that I didn't have to be ashamed of myself. And I could actually, feel really good about my identity and my ancestors and my people. And I felt an extreme sense of, I don't know, power, awareness, and strength from having just that knowledge. And I knew that there's lots of other Indigenous peoples who didn't have this information. And I felt like if they had heard this story the way that I had, that they would have some kind of healing. And so I feel like, education is a form of healing and it's necessary for like us as a society moving forward. And so for me, I knew when I was in university, people weren't going to read my academic papers, my
Mm.
essays that I was writing. And so I was like, I know people watch movies and I do love making content. I love being creative. And so if I can bring these stories to people through film, then they're going to be more open to, hearing these narratives. And to me, I just feel like this is like a really important way of education. And so for me, documentaries is a way of sharing stories that people normally might not hear about or might not think that they would want to hear about. And so it's a great opportunity for that.
All right, great. Well, that was beautiful. And Charlie, thank you so much for your time. Is there a final thought you'd like to end this interview with?
Um, Yeah, I just want to say, I want to acknowledge, James Smith Cree Nation and, all of the work of the community that they're doing to support their community members and to heal and to grow. It was just so inspiring being in the gymnasium, watching the families cheer for their family members and watching people cry, tears of joy. Like we need to see more stories of, of that. And there's so much of that going on. We just aren't tapped into it. And so it's such a great gift for James Smith Cree Nation to allow us to, observe this moment and share that with the world. And so thank you also for, acknowledging that and sharing that too. And thanks
My
for having
pleasure.
me.
Yeah, it was fun. You did great. Have you did a lot of interviews before? You did amazing.
No, I'm so scared.
You did so well. You did so well. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.